Hey everyone, welcome back. Today we're taking a look at part two of chapter 30, America in the Roaring Twenties. So remember, the United States chose not to join the League of Nations. The U.S. chose not to ratify the Treaty of Versailles after World War I. And so, for the most part, America is focusing on isolationism following World War I, with a few minor exceptions. So, in 1921, Congress had no choice but to issue a joint resolution to officially end the war since they had not ratified the Treaty of Versailles. And beyond that, these other things on this list are examples of America participating in the world, but outside of the League of Nations. So, for example, in 1922, the Washington Naval Conference was held in Washington, D.C., inviting some of the major countries of the world to discuss issues that might pertain to future wars. They're trying to focus on ways we can eliminate future wars by thinking about what had caused them in the past. So, the five power, the four power, and the nine power treaties are focusing on trying to regulate issues related to the Navy and other areas to ensure that war never happens again. So, for example, the five power treaty set a ratio for naval ships between five of the major countries of the world: US, Great Britain, Japan, France, and Italy. Meaning that if the US has X ships, Great Britain's only allowed to have Y amount of ships, so it's attempting to keep that nonstop militarism from climbing up and up and up that had led to World War One. We also see with the four power treaty, the focus here is on maintaining the status quo in Asia. Status quo means keep things the way they've always been. Let's not try to take each other's quote unquote property or colonial possessions, right? That contest for imperialism had been one of the reasons leading into World War One. And then finally, for the Washington Naval Conference, the Nine Power Treaty. All the countries at the Washington Naval Conference agreed to maintain that open door policy in China, that nobody's going to carve China up and thus potentially lead to a future war. Now, outside of the Washington Naval Conference, another example of the U.S. somewhat participating in the world outside of the League of Nations comes with the Kellogg Briand Pact of 1928. This had originally been signed between the United States and France, but 62 other nations joined in and signed this agreement. And basically, what this says is that war is illegal. So, 62 countries signed this, agreeing that war from here on out is illegal. The problem is, there's no enforcement capability. So, what do you do when a country who has signed the Kellogg Briand Pact goes against it and invades? Literally nothing. So, for now, it's just letting the countries feel like they're doing something, but it's not actually going to stop any future wars. Here you see those ratios from the Washington Naval Conference and the men signing the treaties from the Washington Naval Conference as well. Okay. So now another major problem with the end of World War One is America is owed a lot of money from World War One. We had been a major creditor nation to our allies, particularly France and Great Britain. They owed us about $16 billion, and we really want to get paid back. The pressure is Great Britain and France are broke. They don't have any money. And so they begin putting pressure on Germany. Germany, as part of that Treaty of Versailles, had to accept reparations to the tune of about $32 billion. So France and Great Britain says, we can't pay you back, United States, until Germany starts to pay these reparations, those economic punishments that had been given to Germany for quote unquote starting World War One. Germany has no money either. So in 1923, Germany began to hyperinflate their economy, meaning just printing off money like it's going out of business in an attempt to repay this debt, obviously with extremely worthless currency. Additionally, Germany seized control of the Ruhr Valley, which was, or I'm sorry, France took control of the Ruhr Valley, which was where Germany's industry was located. This is creating a crisis. France and Great Britain do not want this worthless money. The US doesn't want worthless money either. And so in 1924, the United States created the Dawes Plan as a way to fix, for now, this economic problem. And so this is going to create a cycle of debt. The U.S., American banks, and the stock market, et cetera, will loan money to Germany. Germany will then make their monthly war reparations payments to France and Great Britain. France and Great Britain will then turn around and make their payments to the United States. And on and on and on that cycle goes. But I almost think of this as like you try to pay your credit card bill with another credit card. You can keep your economics here afloat for only so long until it finally catches up and everything comes crashing down, which is exactly what's going to happen when the stock market collapses in 1929. The Great Depression will be a global depression. Here you see that Dawes plan. And a little political cartoon of all the Europeans singing together that they can't pay our debts. And Uncle Sam saying, well, you can't agree on anything else, apparently, other than this. Okay, so in 1928, it seems like, at least, that the economy is at an all-time high. Society seems like it's bursting with innovation and such great things. And for the 1928 election, we see the Republicans nominate Herbert Hoover. Um, his platform is one of prosperity, self-reliance, do it yourself, letting business do what business is going to do. These are the ideas of Herbert Hoover. He wanted people to, quote unquote, pull themselves up by their bootstraps and do it themselves. The Democrats nominated New York Governor Al Smith. Now, Al Smith, aside from being from New York, was also a Catholic. And also remember that we all now have radios in our homes. And so when Americans are listening to the radio, they hear this man speaking to them with a very thick New York accent. Additionally, there's a lot of discrimination against Catholics in the United States at this time. And so many people are turned off by Al Smith, assuming that if you vote for Al Smith, the Pope over in Vatican City will actually control the United States. Additionally, people didn't like his foreign sounding accent from New York. And so Al Smith resoundingly loses to Herbert Hoover in 1928. Even the Solid South defected from the Democratic Party. Remember, the Solid South, those solidly Democratic states, actually voted for this election for Herbert Hoover, known as the Hoovercrats, as they were called. And very interestingly, at Herbert Hoover's inauguration, keep in mind this is a mere months away from the stock market collapse and the beginning of the Great Depression. Herbert Hoover said, quote, "We in America today are nearer to the final triumph over poverty than ever before in the history of this land. We shall soon, with the help of God, be in sight of the day when poverty will be banished from this land." Boy, did he get that wrong. Here you see the political map or the Electoral College map for 1928. Okay, so let's take a look at the beginning of the Great Depression. I told you guys before that the 1920s, at least on the surface, it seemed like it was a boom time. In fact, oftentimes this was referred to as a boom and bust time. The boom in the 20s, the bust in the 30s. But really, we're building our economy on a really, really shaky foundation. Sure, it seems very prosperous, but there are economic problems brewing under the surface. The fact that a lot of this economic growth has been at the hands of speculation, whether that's in the real estate market or in the stock market. And speculation means very simply to buy low and sell high. So if I buy stock, and remember, stock is I'm buying a piece of a company. So if I, in 1928, bought stock in Ford Motor Company, I'm hoping that I can buy X number of shares of stock at a low price. And maybe in a couple months, weeks, years, however long, that stock price will go up and I can sell my stock for a higher price and not actually have to do any work. Real estate speculation and stock speculation are at an all time high. Additionally, speaking of the stock market, Americans were going crazy for buying stock. This is considered a quote bull market where the stock prices are just going up and up and up and up. And so people see this constant upward trend of the stock market and they want in, thinking this is going to be easy money. This is called a bull market, as contrasted to a bear market. A bear market are stock prices going down. But once again, people don't have money in their pocket, right? They're already buying all those consumer products on credit, right? We talked about installment buying in the last set of notes. Um, the same is going to be true with stocks. A process called buying stocks, quote, on the margin. I can go to a stockbroker and say, I want to buy 100 shares of Ford Motor Company, but I don't have the money right now. They'd say, that's fine, give us 10%, put 10% down, we'll cover the rest. And quote unquote, when stock prices go up and you sell for a profit, allegedly, you can pay us back plus interest. This buying on the stock only works if stock prices keep going up. And it's also assuming that that never ending upward trend of the stock market will continue on. The second the stock market inevitably is going to take a dip, this is going to lead to a crumbling economy. Finally, aside from the consumerism on credit and the stock and the real estate speculation and buying stock on the margin, we have massive national debt in the United States after the war. Now, Andrew Mellon, who was the Secretary of the Treasury, is using a system known as supply side economics or quote unquote trickle down economics. This is where the government cuts taxes to the wealthy in the hopes that that is going to spur innovation and they will invest that in businesses and then prosperity will quote unquote trickle down to the lower classes. But it all comes crashing down starting in 1929. Now, we often think of the Great Depression as starting with the stock market crash. And sure, that is somewhat accurate, but there had been, the writing on the wall prior to this, that sure it seemed prosperous. And we have this incredibly high stock market and people are buying and buying and buying. But that is not a sustainable economic situation, especially since it's being built on credit. Right. And also, let's be real. How many Model Ts are people going to buy? How many toasters or washing machines are people going to buy? People might go out and buy those things, but eventually the buying is going to have to slow down, whether it's because we already own these products or because we can't afford them, right? And also, another writing on the wall type situation comes with farmers during this time. Now, farmers that had been making a lot of money actually during and right after World War One because European farmers had been out of it for that duration. So, American farmers had bought up a lot of extra land, they had invested in farm. Producing agricultural type things like tractors and plows and things like that in order to make money. But once European farmers started working again, we see internationally a huge supply of agricultural products, meaning prices started to go down. So even before the rest of the economy started to crash, things are already crashing for farmers in the United States. Now, when it comes to the stock market specifically, we see this massive upward trend of the stock market, what's called a speculative bubble, right? People are buying and buying and buying, thinking they can't lose. But that's not sustainable. And on October 29th, 1929, the stock market took a little bit of a dip. The public freaked out. They panicked because if I've bought stock hoping or assuming that the prices are going to go up and I see it take a little dip, well, I'm not going to be the one left holding the bag. I don't want to be the one if everything comes crashing down to lose everything. So people rushed to sell their stock. This is absolutely mob mentality. But when people are rushing to sell off this stock, that's only going to cause the stock market to collapse because people selling their stock causes prices to drop. And so this mob mentality actually leads to a collapse of the stock market. And so Americans, we often look at the stock market collapse as, the quote unquote cause, but really it's just a symptom of an overall larger economic problem. The entire economy is going to start contracting on itself, meaning closing in on itself, right? Stock prices drop. So that not only means that me, as the person that bought stock in Ford Motor Company, loses money, but now Ford or any other company loses that investment. When we buy stock, we are investing in that company. And if Ford or Hoover or whoever doesn't have that money, they're not going to be able to pay their workers or open up more factories. They're going to have to lay workers off, and the economy is going to start collapsing like a row of dominoes collapsing on itself. Here we see a man, he's got this sweet car, but he's looking to sell it because he lost all his money in the stock market. And here you see that collapse, right? The 1920s saw that speculative bubble going up and up and up and up. And then here's Black Tuesday, a minor little dip, but still really high. People panic and start selling, right? Things start to bottom out. But look, we're still pretty high compared to the earlier part of the 1920s. It's not gonna fully bottom out till 1932, 1933. This is the depth of the Great Depression, the absolute worst part of the Great Depression when everything is collapsing. And notice this, the stock market doesn't actually rebound until 1954. That is a really long time for people to be worried about whether or not the economy is just done forever. Here you see that bull market in another way, and then ultimately the collapse of the Great Depression. In the next chapter, we're going to talk about the election of Franklin Roosevelt and his attempt to fix the Great Depression, which is called the New Deal. But we'll talk about that in the next chapter. So, when it comes to the Great Depression, it is multifaceted. The fact that for the last decade or so, companies have been overproducing, just pumping out products left and right. And advertising has spurred us to all buy it. We want to keep up with the Joneses, right? And so we're going into debt. But remember, I told you guys already that people aren't making that much more in their salaries to keep up with all the stuff they want to buy, and credit was way too easy to get. So why should I go without this new Model T or this new radio or a washing machine or a refrigerator or whatever it is when I can buy it on credit? Additionally, there were foreign economic problems, right? Whether it is that cycle of debt from the Dawes Plan between Great Britain, France, Germany, and the US. And then finally, the Hawley Smoot tariff exacerbated or made the entire issue even worse, if you can even believe it. The US government, Congress, freaked out when the economy started collapsing and businesses start to close, right? If we're not investing in these and there's no money to be had, the worry is like, well, what if foreign competition is going to put even more businesses out of business? And so Congress had passed the Hawley Smoot tariff, a really high tariff, as a way to hopefully protect American businesses so that you would be more likely to buy American made goods than maybe those foreign made goods. But the problem, though, as we've said before, those other countries will create their own retaliatory tariffs against the US. So if we issue a tariff against Great Britain will issue a tariff against the United States. And so not only will this be an American depression, it's going to be a global depression. American businesses and farmers can't sell their products overseas, and every economy in the world is going to come collapsing down, a total collapse of the global economy. So, how does Herbert Hoover respond? Now, Herbert Hoover really is stuck between a rock and a hard place, right? I almost feel bad for Herbert Hoover because he was really in the wrong place at the wrong time. But he is going to bear the brunt of people's anger and fear over this Great Depression. He is going to get a lot of the blame pretty unfairly for this Great Depression. Now, Herbert Hoover was a humanitarian, but he truly believed in his heart of hearts of what's called rugged individualism. Do it yourself. Pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Don't expect a handout. He did not believe it was the government's job to fix this. Remember, he is very much in favor of laissez faire. The government needs to keep its hands off the economy. If anyone should participate, according to Herbert Hoover, it should be relief organizations or charities. But this depression is way too widespread. At the height of the depression, 25% of the American public was unemployed. And of the people that were still employed, their wages were cut in half. So nobody went untouched during this Great Depression. And relief organizations and charities just can't handle the absolute need that people have. And besides, who is going to contribute when everyone is losing everything? People are starting to demand the government do more. And so Herbert Hoover begrudgingly does institute some public works projects towards the end of his term in office, like building the Hoover Dam. Building the Hoover Dam will create jobs, right? To start hiring Americans to work and build the Hoover Dam. But it's not enough. It only is a drop in the bucket of the unemployment that people are facing. Additionally, Herbert Hoover is utilizing trickle down economics. So, if you imagine the United States society as a triangle with the point facing up, the US government in trickle down economics, also called supply side economics, pours money into the top, giving tax breaks or possibly loans to people at the very, very top. In this case, businesses, banks, and railroad companies. Businesses, banks, and railroad companies are getting tax breaks and loans from the federal government through Hoover's organization, the Reconstruction Finance Corporation. The hope is that this will prime the pump, that those businesses, banks, and railroad companies will use that money to create businesses that'll thus create jobs. And people at the bottom of that triangle will eventually get hired and start making money, or prosperity will quote unquote trickle down to the lower classes. Now, this doesn't really actually happen. When these loans and tax breaks were given to the wealthy at the top, instead of investing it in the economy, they just paid off their own debts. And that prosperity doesn't actually trickle down. Additionally, Americans who have lost everything are looking for someone to blame. And so Hoover is going to bear the brunt of this criticism. A lot of lower class people are wondering where their handout is. Where's my tax break? Where's my loan from the government? You're pouring money into the companies that maybe started this Great Depression, but us at the bottom are suffering mightily, say the poor. So the final nail in Herbert Hoover's coffin as President of the United States comes in the summer of 1932. Now, previously in the 1920s, Congress had promised veterans of World War I a quote unquote bonus that veterans had lost money by going to fight in the war because had they stayed home, they could have made more money working in the factories. And so, as a way to keep veterans happy in the 1920s, Congress had promised them a bonus that in 1945 they would get, a lump sum. They would get a check, a bonus, so to speak. But it's not supposed to come till 1945. But now it's 1932, and we are at the bottom of the Great Depression. Unemployment, like I said, is at a 32% rate nationwide. In certain parts of the country, it's higher, like Detroit. Among African Americans, it was as high as 50% because of racism. Um, Wages have been slashed left and right. And so veterans are demanding their bonus now. They want their early bonus. And so these veterans march on Washington, D.C., demanding their early bonus. This is called the Bonus Army March. And they set up what are called Hoovervilles just outside of D.C. Now, a Hooverville was a tongue in cheek, sarcastic little shanty town. They would call them Hoovervilles, these little tent cities, as a way to blame Herbert Hoover for this Great Depression, right? And so these veterans are demanding their bonus now. Congress doesn't have the money. Herbert Hoover orders them to disband, but they don't. And instead, Herbert Hoover called in the military, including the future generals Patton and MacArthur, to forcibly push the bonus army out. They went in, fired into the crowd, launched tear gas, launched other sorts of the gases. People were killed, etc. And all of this being published in the newspapers. That this is how Herbert Hoover treats the veterans of the Great War. People are already angry with him about the Great Depression, blaming him for the Great Depression. And so, in the upcoming election, there is no way that Herbert Hoover stands a chance of winning this election because the American public has now turned against him. Here are some images from that bonus army march that in that Hooverville. We need cash, not a tombstone. Pay the bonus now. And another picture of that little shanty town, that tent city for the bonus army. And that is it, guys. Thanks so much. Talk to you later. Bye.